Nevada Desert, 1951. Operation Buster Jangle was in full swing. The world watched as mushroom clouds bloomed over the desert floor, a display of raw, terrifying power. But while the public's eyes were fixed on the sky, a small, elite team of military geologists was focused on something buried deep beneath the limestone of the Groom Range. They weren't looking for minerals. They were following a signal, a low-frequency vibration that had been recorded by seismic sensors during the very first atomic test. Lieutenant Sarah Vance was the youngest officer on that team. Her job was to map the anomalies. On a scorching Tuesday in August, the drill bit hit something that wasn't limestone. It didn't crunch, it sang. A high-pitched, harmonic ringing that shattered the glass goggles of two nearby workers. When the dust settled, they found themselves staring at a surface that shouldn't have existed, a wall of polished, iridescent metal that felt warmer than the desert sun. This wasn't a bunker built by the Soviets, and it certainly wasn't a natural formation. As Sarah stepped closer, her military-issued Geiger counter didn't just spike, it flatlined, as if the very concept of radiation had been neutralized in the presence of this object. "Lieutenant, step back," her commander shouted, but it was too late. Sarah's hand made contact with the surface. In an instant, the desert heat vanished. For a fraction of a second, Sarah didn't see the dark tunnel or the sweaty faces of her team. She saw a forest, but the trees were made of translucent glass, and the sky above was a deep, pulsing violet with 3 moons. She felt a rush of information, not words, but coordinates. Thousands of them, flashing through her mind like a digital strobe light. When she was pulled away, she was bleeding from her ears, but her eyes were glowing with a faint, silvery light. Within 2 hours, the entire site was locked down. A restricted zone was established that would later be known by the world as Area 51. But the public was told it was for testing U-2 spy planes. The iridescent wall, the glass forest, and Sarah Vance were officially erased from the military's payroll. Sarah was taken to a sub-level facility in Virginia. She was no longer a person. She was Subject Zero. For 75 years, she remained in a state of suspended animation, her body not aging a single day, while the military tried to decode the coordinates she had seen. They built a world-class surveillance state just to find the locations she had mapped, locations that weren't on Earth, but inside it. Fast forward to 2026. A massive sinkhole opens up in the middle of a remote farm in Nebraska. A local teenager drops his GoPro into the abyss, and when he retrieves the footage, the world finally sees what Sarah saw in 1951. The iridescent wall was just the door, and the door has just been unlocked. The footage from the GoPro went viral within minutes, bypassing every government firewall designed to suppress it. The world watched in stunned silence as the camera tumbled past the dirt and limestone of the Nebraska sinkhole, eventually hitting a pocket of air that shouldn't have been there. The video showed a cavern the size of a small city, illuminated not by fire or electricity, but by the same iridescent metallic structure Lieutenant Sarah Vance had touched in 1951. At the center of the cavern sat a monolith, a crystalline pillar that hummed with a frequency so low it caused buildings 3 states away to vibrate. But it wasn't the size of the cavern that terrified the military commanders watching from the Pentagon. It was the fact that the monolith was breathing. Deep in the Virginia sublevel facility, the alarms began to wail for the first time in 7 decades. Subject Zero, Sarah Vance, had finally opened her eyes. The silvery glow in her pupils had intensified, and her heart, which had been beating at a rate of once per hour for 75 years, was now racing at 140 beats per minute. "She's waking up," the lead scientist screamed, scrambling to stabilize the containment unit. The Nebraska breach has triggered the synchronization. She's no longer just a subject. She's the transmitter. In Nebraska, the situation on the ground was spiraling into chaos. Within an hour of the sinkhole's appearance, Black Hawk helicopters descended upon the quiet farm. A 3-mile dead zone was established, cutting off all cellular and internet signals. But the military wasn't there to rescue anyone. They were there to deploy Project Looking Glass, a secret technology developed using the data harvested from Sarah's brain over the decades. Colonel Marcus Thorne, the man in charge of the Nebraska site, stepped onto the edge of the sinkhole. He wasn't looking at the cavern. He was looking at a portable terminal that displayed Sarah's vital signs from Virginia. Every time her heart spiked, the iridescent monolith below pulsed with a violet light. "It's not a weapon," Thorne whispered into his comms, his voice trembling. "It's a life support system. The military didn't hide it because they were afraid of what it would do to us. They hid it because they were afraid of what we would do to it." As the sun began to set, a strange phenomenon occurred. The violet light from the sinkhole didn't dissipate. It began to solidify, forming hard light, structures that resembled the glass trees Sarah had seen in her 1951 vision. These structures started growing out of the sinkhole, piercing through the farm's soil and reaching toward the sky. They were beautiful, but they were absorbing the very air around them, creating a localized vacuum that made it impossible for the soldiers to breathe without oxygen tanks. Suddenly, Sarah's voice echoed through the comms of every soldier on site, not through their headsets, but directly inside their minds. The 75-year cycle is complete. The anchor is ready to return. Tell the colonel to stop the drill, or the atmosphere will be the first thing to burn. Thorne looked down at the massive thermal drill his team had just positioned at the center of the monolith. He had orders from the White House to neutralize the anomaly at any cost. But Sarah's voice didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a plea. "Colonel, we have a lock on the core," the drill operator shouted. "Initiating penetration in 10 seconds. Wait," Thorne yelled, but the command was swallowed by the roar of the machinery. As the drill made contact with the iridescent surface, the silver light in Sarah's eyes in Virginia turned blood red. In Nebraska, the glass trees didn't just grow, they shattered, sending shards of crystallized energy flying like shrapnel. The sky above the farm turned a bruised, pulsing violet, and the 3 moons from the 1951 vision began to appear, ghost-like, behind the afternoon sun. The secret was out, and the secret was hungry. The moment the drill bit pierced the iridescent shell, the laws of physics over the Nebraska plains didn't just bend, they snapped. In the Virginia facility, the containment glass around Sarah Vance shattered outward as if pushed by an invisible hand. Her body, suspended in midair, was no longer human. She had become a living bridge of light. The frequency, it's inverted, the scientists screamed. The silver light had completely vanished, replaced by a jagged, crimson energy that mimicked the rhythm of a failing heart. Back at the sinkhole, Colonel Thorne watched in horror as the thermal drill was slowly being digested by the monolith. The metal wasn't melting. It was being disassembled at an atomic level, its molecules being repurposed to build the crystalline forest that was now spreading across the farm at a rate of 10 feet per second. The soldiers who hadn't reached their oxygen masks in time were falling to their knees, not from lack of air, but because the air itself was becoming too heavy for human lungs to process. "Withdraw. Everyone out of the dead zone now," Thorne commanded, but his voice was drowned out by a sound that came from the center of the earth, a deep, tectonic groan that felt like a planet-sized gear finally clicking into place. As the military vehicles retreated, the 3 spectral moons in the sky grew more solid. They weren't celestial bodies, They were massive, orbital platforms, mirrors of a civilization that had been archived under the Earth's crust 75 years ago. The military hadn't been keeping a discovery secret. They had been keeping a sentinel imprisoned. Sarah's voice returned to Thorne's mind, but it was no longer a plea. It was a cold, calculated directive. You have broken the seal before the synchronization was complete. The atmospheric conversion cannot be stopped now. The Earth you know is being rewritten to accommodate the return of the first architects. Thorne scrambled into the back of a command Humvee, staring at his tablet. He saw satellite imagery of the globe. The Nebraska sinkhole wasn't an isolated event. Similar anomalies were appearing in the Sahara, the Siberian tundra, and the Mariana Trench. The coordinates Sarah had mapped in 1951 weren't locations. They were pressure valves. If we can't stop the conversion from the surface, Thorne shouted over the wind, we have to stop it at the source. We have to go back to Sarah. He knew the truth now. Project Looking Glass wasn't meant to study the anomaly. It was meant to replace Sarah. The military had been trying to build a digital version of her consciousness for decades, hoping they could control the monoliths without the unpredictability of human emotion. But they had failed. Sarah was the only organic interface that the architects recognized. In Virginia, the facility's director, General Riker, entered the stasis room. He wasn't there to save Sarah. He held a black briefcase containing a neural eraser, a device designed to wipe Sarah's mind clean, effectively killing the bridge and, hopefully, stalling the conversion. She's too dangerous to keep online, Riker said, his hand over the activation switch. If you wipe her, a technician cried out, you disconnect the Earth from the architect's life support. The atmosphere will turn to nitrogen ice in minutes. We'll all freeze. Better to freeze as humans than to breathe as their fuel, Riker retorted. But as he moved to press the switch, Sarah's eyes flickered. The crimson light turned into a blinding gold. She wasn't just a transmitter anymore. She had begun to pull the data back. Through the connection, she began to upload the memories of 1951, the feeling of the desert wind, the smell of rain, the sound of human laughter, into the monoliths. She was trying to teach the architects what it meant to be human before they erased humanity. The golden light emanating from Sarah Vance didn't just illuminate the room in Virginia. It began to physically alter the structure of the facility. The concrete walls began to shimmer like liquid mercury, and the neural eraser in General Riker's hand started to dissolve into glowing dust. What is she doing? Riker screamed, stumbling back as the floor beneath him turned into a transparent pane, revealing a vast network of glowing filaments stretching deep into the Earth's mantle. She's not just teaching them. The technician gasped, staring at a monitor that was scrolling through millions of images, Sarah's memories. She's merging our history with their operating system. She's hacking the architects. But the architects weren't passive observers. As Sarah uploaded the sensory data of Earth, the static, the cold, logical force of the ancient machine fought back. The 3 ghost moons in the sky over Nebraska began to glow with a harsh, ultraviolet light. In an instant, every digital screen on the planet, from smartphones to Times Square billboards, went blank, replaced by a single, vibrating symbol, a circle intersected by 3 jagged lines. In Nebraska, Colonel Thorne found himself trapped inside the Humvee as the vehicle's electronics fried. Outside, the hard light, trees had stopped growing. Instead, they began to pulse in sync with the ultraviolet moons. The air was no longer just heavy. It was beginning to hum with a frequency that vibrated the very teeth in Thorne's head. They're rejecting the upload, Thorne realized. They don't want our memories. They want our space. Suddenly, the ground in front of the Humvee exploded. Out of the iridescent monolith rose a reclaimer, a towering, arachnid-like construct made of the same shifting metal Sarah had touched in 1951. It didn't have eyes or a face, just a central aperture that emitted a beam of gray light. Anything the light touched didn't burn, it simply ceased to exist. A nearby military tent, a stack of supply crates, and a patch of grass were unmade in seconds, leaving behind perfectly smooth, gray craters. "It's a cleanup crew," Thorne whispered, grabbing a manual flare gun. "They're erasing the noise to make room for the signal." In Virginia, Sarah's body began to fracture, not like bone and skin, but like a low-resolution image breaking into pixels. The strain of holding the connection was tearing her apart. "General, if you kill her now, the reclaimers will finish the erasure," the technician shouted. "But if we give her more power, if we bridge the looking glass server directly into her mind, she might be able to overwhelm their logic." Riker looked at the crumbling walls, then at the girl who hadn't aged in 75 years. "You want to turn a human brain into a supercomputer?" "I want to give a human heart a megaphone," the technician replied. Riker hesitated for only a second before slamming a different override switch, the synchronization link. The result was a psychic shockwave that was felt by every living creature on Earth. Sarah's scream wasn't a sound, it was a vision. For a brief moment, every person on the planet saw the 1951 desert, felt the heat of the Nevada sun, and heard the rhythmic ringing of the iridescent wall. In Nebraska, the reclaimer froze. The gray beam flickered and died. The hard light, trees turned from crystalline glass into real, organic oak and pine. The architect's machine was confused. It was receiving a command that said, "This world is not empty space. This world is occupied by love, pain, and memory." But the victory was short-lived. The three moons in the sky began to align. "They're preparing a hard reset," Sarah's voice echoed through the world, sounding exhausted and thin. "They're going to burn the atmosphere to clear the error, and the error is us." The sky didn't turn red, it turned a terrifying, electric white. The three moons aligned into a perfect vertical row, forming a celestial lens. This was the hard reset, a concentrated burst of solar radiation amplified by the architect's orbital platforms, designed to strip the Earth's atmosphere and sanitize the surface for a fresh installation of their reality. In Nebraska, the temperature began to climb at an impossible rate. The grass around the sinkhole didn't catch fire, it evaporated. Colonel Thorne felt his skin prickle as the oxygen began to ionize. "They're burning the sky," Thorne shouted into his manual radio, which was now spitting out sparks. "Sarah, if you can hear me, we're out of time." In the Virginia facility, the situation was even more dire. The synchronization link had turned the room into a vortex of raw energy. General Riker and the technicians were pinned against the walls by the sheer force of the data stream. At the center of the storm, Sarah Vance was no longer a person. Her physical form had almost entirely dissolved into a golden, geometric silhouette, a human-shaped patch in the universe's code. "I can't hold them all." Sarah's voice wasn't coming from her mouth anymore. It was vibrating out of the metallic walls. "The reset, it's a mathematical certainty. Their logic, it doesn't recognize the value of a life form that isn't efficient." "Then don't be efficient," the technician screamed, shielding his eyes. "Be chaotic. Give them something they can't calculate." Sarah's golden silhouette flickered. She understood. The architects were masters of order, of symmetry, of perfect cycles. But humanity was the opposite. We were the glitches. Sarah reached deep into the Project Looking Glass servers, but she didn't look for more data. She looked for the imperfections, She pulled every recorded mistake, every erratic heartbeat, every illogical act of sacrifice from the military's 75-year archive. She took the grief of a soldier losing a comrade, the irrational hope of a mother in a war zone, and the chaotic beauty of a child's first painting. She turned herself into a logic bomb of pure human emotion. As the white beam from the 3 moons hit the upper atmosphere, Sarah launched the counter signal. It wasn't an upload, it was an infection. In an instant, the 3 moons began to wobble in their orbit. The perfect vertical alignment shattered. The ultraviolet light flickering from the platforms turned into a chaotic rainbow of colors as the architect's operating system struggled to process the concept of unnecessary love. In Nebraska, the reclaimer, the arachnid sentinel, stopped its erasure. Its central aperture pulsed erratically, shifting from gray to violet to gold. It began to mimic human movements, its metallic limbs twitching as if it were trying to dance, or perhaps to weep. "She's breaking them," Thorne whispered, watching as the atmosphere of fire began to cool. The sky transitioned from electric white back to a bruised purple, and then, miraculously, to a pale, dawn-lit blue. But the architects had one final failsafe. If they couldn't sanitize the earth, they would collapse the anchor. "Sarah, get out of there!" General Riker yelled as the floor beneath the stasis chamber began to dissolve into a black void. "The facility is dematerializing." "I can't leave." Sarah's voice was peaceful now, echoing from the very air. "The bridge has to be closed from the other side. Someone has to stay in the static to make sure they don't try again." "Sarah, no." Thorne's voice broke through the comms. "It's been 75 years. You deserve to see the sun." "I am seeing it, Marcus," she replied. "I'm seeing every sun, in every version of Earth, all at once. And they are all beautiful." With a final, thunderous crack of energy, the golden silhouette of Sarah Vance expanded, filling the entire Virginia facility, and then it vanished. The 3 moons in the sky over Nebraska didn't fall. They simply faded, like a dream at daybreak. The iridescent monolith in the sinkhole turned into common, unmoving stone. The hard light trees turned into dust and blew away in the wind. Silence returned to the Nebraska plains. The morning after the Great Fade was the quietest the world had ever known. In Nebraska, the military cordon remained, but the soldiers were no longer holding weapons. They were standing at the edge of the sinkhole, staring at a field of wildflowers that had bloomed overnight. Flowers that didn't belong to any known species, their petals shimmering with a faint, iridescent glow. Colonel Thorne sat on the bumper of his Humvee, watching the sun rise. The sky was a perfect, deep blue, but the stars didn't quite disappear. Even in the daylight, a faint network of golden threads was visible if you looked long enough, the scars of the bridge Sarah had built. In Virginia, the sublevel facility was a tomb of glass. The stasis chamber was empty, the floor polished to a mirror finish. There was no trace of Sarah Vance, no trace of General Riker, and no trace of the technology that had kept the secret for 75 years. The Project Looking Glass servers had been wiped clean, not by a virus, but by a physical transformation of the silicon into fine, white sand. "She didn't just save us," the technician whispered, standing in the middle of the empty lab. "She archived us. She made it so the architects can never delete Earth without deleting themselves. We are part of their code now." The military's 75-year secret was finally out, but it wasn't the scandal the world expected. It was a revelation. Across the globe, the other pressure valves, in the Sahara, the tundra, and the deep sea, had also turned to stone. The reclaimers had vanished, leaving behind only the gray craters as a reminder of how close humanity had come to the void. But the most strange phenomenon was yet to come. People began to report echoes. A man in London would suddenly remember the smell of the Nevada desert in 1951. A woman in Tokyo would hear the harmonic ringing of a metallic wall. The collective memory of Sarah Vance, her sacrifice, her love, and her chaotic humanity was leaking into the minds of everyone on the planet. We were no longer 8 billion separate lives. We were a synchronized symphony. Colonel Thorne looked down at his manual radio. It was dead, but a faint static began to pulse from the speaker, a rhythmic, heartbeat-like sound. "The door is closed," a voice whispered, so faint it could have been the wind. "But the window is open. Look for the light in the imperfections." Thorne smiled. He realized that the military hadn't just been hiding a discovery, they had been hiding our potential. For 75 years, we were taught to fear the unknown, but Sarah had shown that the unknown was simply the part of ourselves we hadn't met yet. As the months passed, the world changed. The hard light technology was slowly understood, not as a weapon, but as a way to heal the planet. The craters became sanctuaries. The iridescent flowers became the source of a new energy that didn't burn or pollute. The architects never returned, perhaps because they were too busy processing the error of human emotion that was now at the heart of their empire. In a small cemetery in Virginia, a new monument was erected. It wasn't a statue of a soldier or a hero. It was a simple, polished block of iridescent metal that felt warmer than the sun. It bore no name, only a date, 1951, infinity. The screen fades to black as the golden threads in the sky pulse one last time, matching the rhythm of the viewer's own heartbeat. A final message appears. The secret was never what they found in the mountain. The secret was what they couldn't take from the soul.